Hi, my name is Lars. I'm 20 years old. I'm living in Norway, born in Norway. I have finished then, of course, but I was born with a disease that I didn't get to know about until 2 years ago. That I was born with Asperger's syndrome, which is basically a syndrome that is basically a sickness that makes you unable to socialize with some to people to a certain level. But in my case, I can say that Asperger syndrome is the kind of sickness that will be uh, you always will be having. In this case, I will read something. This is some information on Asperger syndrome is, by the way, available on Wikipedia. You can just Google it or search in Wikipedia about it. Uh, Asperger's syndrome or Asperger's syndrome is an autism spectrum disorder that is characterized by significant difficulties in social interaction, along with restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior and interests. It differs from the autism spectrum disorders by its relative preservation of linguistic and cognitive development. Although not required for diagnosis, physical clumsiness and atypical use of language are frequently reported. Asperger syndrome is named after the Austrian uh, ped ped pediatrician uh, Hans Asperger, who in 1944 described children in his practice who lacked nonverbal communication skills, demonstrated limited empathy with their peers, and were psychically clumsy. 50 years later, it was stan- standard, standardized as a diagnosis, but many questions remain about aspects of this disorder. For example, there is doubt about whether it's distinct from high function autism (HFA), particularly because of this. Its prevalence is not firmly established. It has been proposed that the diagnosis Asperger be of Asperger's be eliminated to replace a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder on a severity scale. The exact cause is unknown, although research supports that the likelihood of genetic basics uh, brain imaging techniques have not identified a clear common pathology. There is no single treatment, and the effectiveness of particular interventions is supported by only limited data. Intervention is aimed at improving symptoms and function. The mainstay of management is behavioral therapy, focusing on specific uh, uh, defects, uh, defects. I don't know how to pronounce it. So specific things. Otherwise, to address poor communication skills, obsessive and repetitive routines, and sick physical clumsiness. Most individuals improve over time, but difficulties with communication, social adjustment, and independent living can exist and continue into adulthood. Some research and people with Asperger's have advocated a shift in attitudes toward the view of that is that is a difference rather than a disability that must be treated or cured. I'm going to read a little bit more. Asperger's AS is the extent of the overlap between AS and high functioning autism, HFA, again, autism unaccompanied by mental retardation, is unclear. The current ASD classification is to some extent an artifact of how autism was discovered, and may not reflect the true nature of the spectrum. One of the proposed changes in the diagnostic and static, st statistical manual of mental disorders, 5th edition, set to be published in May 2013, would eliminate Asperger syndrome as a separate diagnosis and fold it under autism spectrum disorders, which would be rated on a severity scale. The proposed change is controversial, and it has been argued that the syndrome's diagnostic criteria should be changed instead. And a bit down, characteristics. Pervasive development, de developmental disorder. Asperger syndrome is distinguished by a pattern of symptoms rather than a single symptom. It's characterized by qualitative impairment in social interaction, by stereotyped and restricted patterns of behavior, activities, interests, and not clinically significant delay in cognitive development or general delay in language. Intense preoccupation with narrow subject, one-sided verbosity, restricted prosody, and physical clumsiness are typical of the condition, but it are not required for diagnosis. It's a long page, so I skip a few facts. Speech and language. Although individuals with Asperger syndrome acquire language skills without significant general delay, and their speech typically lacks significant abnormalities, language acquisition acquisition sorry and use of often atypical abnormalities will include verbosity, uh, abrupt transitions, literal interpretations, and miscomprehension of nuance, use of metaphor meaningful only to the speaker, auditory perception defects, unusually uh, pedantic and formal or idiosyncratic speech, and oddities of loudness, pitch, intonation, prosody, and rhythm. Three aspects of communication patterns are clinical interest, poor prosody, tangential and circumstantial speech are marked verbosity. Although inflection and intonation may be less rigid or monotonic than in autism.